Well, hello everybody. We have a very overdue video to do here today, but an exciting video nonetheless, talking about what could have been the Detroit Red Wings of the 1990s. Now, before we start, please make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new to hockey or if you're new to my channel, whatever the case may be. I'd love to have you here along the way as I try to do this as a full-time career. Now, let's get into it. And this video is part of a series, What Could Have Been series, where I look at teams through the decades and what could have been. The way I decided the 90s one is a little different. I'll explain compared to the other two videos I did, but this one is centered around, of course, the Detroit Red Wings, a team that won multiple championships within the 1990s. But we're going to talk about that versus, the outcome and, what other impacts it might have had. So let's get into it. So what actually happened for the Detroit Red Wings in the 1990s? They went to the Stanley Cup 3 separate times, and they ended up winning 2, losing 1. They lost the 1995 Stanley Cup to the underdog New Jersey Devils in a shocking sweep that didn't go Detroit's way as their very painful title drought continued on. Yes, they did win in 1997 and 1998, but at the time, especially if you go back and you rewatch those documentaries about that 95 Devils team, you can hear the media clips about the Red Wings just falling apart and this being another terrible year by Detroit standards. And that is kind of where we're at now, because you can only, in this little fake reality that I made, you can only change, let's say, like a team winning or losing a championship, making it their team of the decade. Whereas the Detroit Red Wings, all they had to do was win one more title for me to kind of talk about what would have happened. And what would have happened is they win just one extra cup, which I know doesn't seem like the biggest of deals, but it would make them that official dynasty with their 2 other titles in the 90s in 97 and 98. But, some people are going to argue about that, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the video. How does this happen? How do the Detroit Red Wings go on and win that extra cup? This is pretty simple. We're not going to change a whole bunch of stuff. I'm not going to be like some crazy in-depth video where, they have these insane graphics. I can only talk about what I can talk about, and I definitely can't make the graphics that they can. But essentially what I understood from watching multiple clips about that Red Wings team and against the Devils is that they really felt the pressure to go in there and win. And when they didn't right off the bat, things just slid right out from underneath them. The Red Wings felt like it was just all the momentum going against that team, and they just went out of control there, and that was that. So I'm just going to change one thing here to start off early on, and we're just going to say that they win that first game of the 1995 Stanley Cup and that they get all on the right track. They originally lost 2-1, which is not a bad loss. They lost in heartbreaking fashion in Game 2 of the series, and it kind of really just fell apart the last 2 games of the series in Games 3 and Games 4. But let's just say that they win Game 1, and regardless of what happens down the line, they win the series, whether that be in 4 games, whether that be 5, 6, 7, whatever the case may be, they go on to win that extra Stanley Cup. What really changes for them here and how will it impact the club? This is where it gets to be very, very weird and how it could impact the club in a variety of ways. And I know I can't fully encompass this because I really put this video together because I realized, hey, you haven't put another What Could Have Been video out in a long time, and so I wanted to get it out. But let's try a little bit to talk about the impact it had on the franchise for Detroit. The first is that Detroit's title pain is 2 years less than what it was originally. They would end it at 40 years instead of 42 years. And you have to remember, 1996, that would have been the year after this loss against the Devils. They lost in the conference final to the Avalanche, the upstart Avalanche. That loss stings, but it would not sting as much. And maybe the Avalanche Red Wings rivalry wouldn't hurt as much if they get this win in 1995, where they get to beat the Devils. So there's that. So instead of the title drought being 42 years, it's 40 years. And maybe, of course, the Devils' future changes as well, because they would have one less ring guaranteed unless they win it somewhere else down the line. Also, certain trades might not be made or probably aren't made, including the trading of offensive defenseman Paul Coffey and 3rd overall pick Keith Primeau, who was at a 30-goal pace per season the previous 3 seasons. He didn't hit 30 in any of those years, but he was at a pace where he had played 82 games, he would have been at a 30-goal pace. But he was actually in his mid-20s when they traded him. So you're looking at Coffey, maybe not the end of the world with Primo. Maybe his legacy is different had he been able to stick around with the Red Wings and, do his thing, and that would have been cool there. Also, Detroit has that classical dynasty. The dynasty that the people go on and on and on about. I think that they did have a dynasty. You look at the fact that they won 97, 98, and 02. That is 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002. That is 3 in 6 years. In my opinion, that's dynasty. If you get 3 championships in 6 years, that is a big deal. But the haters really seem to make a big deal about that when Chicago ended up getting 3 titles in 6 seasons. So that's why I say that it's a little bit bigger of a deal, because they would get 3 in 4 years and then 4 in 7 with this additional title. I guess it'd be 4 in 8. But yeah, you look at this and that would be a big deal, because you would have that official dynasty. But again, I already considered them to be that official dynasty. Finally, but maybe the most important thing here, which I hated to bring this into this, but it was something that I did want to talk about. Maybe we see a different Detroit in the recent years, or I guess in the years leading after that, after the 1995 Stanley Cup. Maybe 1996 stays relatively the same, but 1997, why was that big? Why was that an important year? Because right after Detroit won that Stanley Cup against the Flyers, I think it was in 97, they had few of their players get in a limo accident, and if you are a Detroit fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. And what I'm going to say is maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe you don't have that terrible, unfortunate accident, and then somebody like Vladimir Konstantinov is able to play again, because he never played a single game after that, to my knowledge, because of the injury sustained in that crash, which was very unfortunate, because the year that happened, I'm pretty sure he finished second in Norris voting. And was a guy that hadn't won a Norris, to my knowledge, but was in the running those previous 2 seasons. He was a little bit older at the time when it happened, and I could not find his contract details. Maybe he would have left Detroit in free agency after that, but again, I couldn't find anything online about his contract. But you have to think, with the Red Wings being in this spot where they would have won in 95, 97, possibly again 98, and with Konstantinov being on that lineup, or on that roster, and possibly being at that Norris caliber, that would be a big deal. And I think that would be something that we would like to see for him, because unfortunately, with his injuries, he of course not only didn't get to play again, but has to have medical care, and that is very tragic. But that is kind of what we talked about, the what could have been for the Detroit Red Wings. And like I said, it just looks minor when you take a glance and you say 1 extra championship, but it's the official dynasty. Primo not getting traded, Konstantinov maybe not getting in that accident, and maybe some other things changing too, like the Devils' legacies, the Avalanche and the Red Wings rivalries. It goes pretty deep, and you know that there would be a lot of changes in the time. Also, Primo was a 3rd overall pick, I believe, on the previous draft, one of the drafts a few years before that, when he got picked by Detroit. So yeah, all around, this is a very impactful what could have been for a club, because they would have another championship, but also you never know if they'd have more after that. But we will see. What are your thoughts on this? What could have been for the Red Wings? Do you still see some moves being made for Detroit, regardless if they won the Cup in 95? Do you see some other things going some different ways for some other teams? Let me know down below why. And also, please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Everybody stay safe. Have a great night. And you go off hockey all right. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.